When we last left off, the Imperial Commission had deposed Pope Dioscorus and ordered his arrest. They had also decreed that the next session should take place on the next day, the 9th of October, and should be a discussion of the faith. In preparation for this session, they gave the bishops a homework assignment. Each bishop was to prepare a written statement detailing their faith, and this statement had to be in line with the faith of Emperor Marcian. This proposed session on the 9th of October, however, never took place. The next session took place on October 10th. While modern versions of the Acts of the Council place the second session as the discussion of the faith, many modern scholars disagree, and instead claim that this session was the trial of Pope Dioscorus. To understand the origins of this controversy, we need to take a look at the oldest copies of the Acts of Chalcedon. In the surviving Greek version, the second session is in fact the trial of Pope Dioscorus. However, it is given the date October 13th. The third session in the Greek Acts is the discussion of faith, but it is given the date October 10th, a date before the second session. This is where the confusion starts. The Latin translators noticed this, and so in their translation, they flipped the order of the sessions in order to put the dates in chronological order. All translations since the 6th century have then continued to use that order of events. However, the internal evidence and statements made within the minutes suggest that the order of the events of the sessions in the Greek manuscript is the accurate order of events, and not the one adopted by the Latin translation. This suggests that the compiler of the Greek manuscript had simply flipped the dates. Whether or not the date flipping was accidental or intentional remains a mystery. The truth stands, however, that the sessions should be taken in the corrected order. The accusations and arrest of Pope Dioscorus happened in the first session on the 8th of October. The trial of Pope Dioscorus happened at the second session on the 10th, and the discussion of faith happened at the third and fourth sessions on the 13th and 17th of October, respectively. Let's now observe some of the evidence that proves that this is the correct order of events. The first piece of evidence comes from the end of the discussion of the faith, where one of the imperial commissioners says that the council will adjourn for 5 days. If the discussion of faith had taken place on the 10th, as recorded in the Latin Acts, then the next session would have been on the 14th, but no such session was held. But if we accept the order of events from the Greek manuscript and correct the dates to match, meaning this session took place on the 13th, then the next session would be on the 17th, which is in fact the case. The second piece of evidence comes from Pope Dioscorus' reply to the second summons. Pope Dioscorus stated that he refuses to attend his trial unless the imperial commissioners were in attendance. In his response, Pope Dioscorus used 3 phrases that give indication of the date of the sessions. The first phrase is his reference to the first session as the previous session. The Greek phrase used, which I will not try to pronounce, implies direct proximity, meaning there could not have been any sessions in between. The next term he uses is diphthera, meaning second, referring to his trial as the second session of the council. Finally, when referring to the first session again, he uses the term proin. This term, while in modern Greek has the general meaning of earlier, in koine, could be interpreted as the day before yesterday. There is no question that the first session took place on the 8th, so if that session was the day before yesterday, that means the trial was taking place on the 10th. The final piece of evidence comes from the statement made by Bishop John of Germanica to Pope Dioscorus when he was sent to summon him for the 3rd time. Bishop John told Pope Dioscorus, "It has been 3 days since, according to the decree of our most pious and Christ-loving Emperor, the most magnificent and glorious officials, and the Sacred Senate with the Holy Council, carried out an examination of the offenses alleged against your religiousness by the most God-beloved Eusebius. Once again, dating the trial as happening 3 days from the first session. While this interpretation of the course of events is most logical and most beneficial with regards to understanding the events, it is just one theory. It is still important to note that if you open any modern translation of the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, you will find the trial labeled as the 3rd session and dated to the 13th of October. For this reason, I will continue to label it as the 3rd session whenever I refer to it, even though it most likely was the 2nd session. As mentioned earlier, at the conclusion of the first session, the Senate concluded that Pope Dioscorus and the 5 bishops who had led the Second Council of Ephesus with him were to be deposed pending the approval of the emperor. While many of the Eastern bishops had shouted in approval of this decision, it was in fact a huge break with canon law. The canons of the Church make it clear that a bishop could only be deposed by a vote of his peers. Pope Dioscorus had not been deposed by any vote of the bishops, but rather by the order of the imperial commissioners. Everyone knew that this deposition was meaningless, and for this reason the trial of Pope Dioscorus was orchestrated. In an attempt to erase the memory of the mishap and clear violation of church tradition that took place in the first session, the imperial commissioners did not attend this new trial. This move was supposed to portray the emperor as being neutral and allowing the church to decide for herself. We all know, however, that the emperor was far from neutral, since he and his wife, Empress Pulcheria, had planned the council to assist Pope Leo in hopes that an alliance with Rome would elevate the See of Constantinople. The trial was also not well attended by the bishops. It is estimated that 370 bishops had attended the Council of Chalcedon. Out of these, only 204 attended the trial, and only 192 voted to condemn Pope Dioscorus. This session, much like the first, began by allowing Bishop Eusebius of Dorylaeum, now seated as a judge, to present allegations against Pope Dioscorus. He made 3 claims. First, he claimed Pope Dioscorus held the same heretical views as Archimandrite Eutyches, who by this point was firmly condemned by all. Second, he claimed that Pope Dioscorus had employed violent monks in order to coerce the bishops at II Ephesus to condemn Bishop Flavian and himself. Finally, that Pope Dioscorus had maliciously prevented the reading of the tome of Pope Leo in order to prevent the council from affirming the Orthodox faith. These claims, as we all know by now, are baseless. During the first session of the Council of Chalcedon, Pope Dioscorus had explained that if Eutyches had disagreed with the Orthodox faith, then he was also ready to condemn him. Second, it was the bishops at II Ephesus who collectively voted to acquit Eutyches and condemn Bishops Eusebius and Flavian. This was demonstrated in both the Acts of II Ephesus and the confessions of the bishops, such as that of Bishop Basil of Seleucia in Isauria at the first session of Chalcedon. Finally, Pope Dioscorus was the only bishop at II Ephesus that voted to read the Tome of Leo. No one else agreed. It is also of note that Bishop Eusebius had not mentioned the blank papers in his original accusation in the first session, nor in any of the numerous petitions he had been sending over the past 2 years. It is clear that he was simply making things up as he went and chose to include this new claim in his petition, since it had proved popular in the previous session. And so, Bishop Eusebius was 3 for 3 at making false allegations. What a champ. Now that the accusations against Pope Dioscorus had been stated, the council decided to summon him to defend himself. The first summons was taken to him by 3 priests, but he refused them, saying that he was under arrest and could not be released from custody to attend the session unless he was granted permission. When they returned to him with signed permission, allowing for his release, he still refused to go. He explained that he wanted the imperial commissioners to be present at the council. The second summons was served to Pope Dioscorus by 3 bishops and one of the deacons who was a notary. He excused himself from attending, claiming that he wasn't feeling well, but they replied that he didn't look that sick. So he once more refused to attend if the imperial commissioners were not present. The bishops told him that he should just go with them and then request for the imperial commissioners to attend the session once he's there. In order to decide whether or not he should go, Pope Dioscorus wanted to determine whether the trial would be against the Council of II Ephesus or personally against him. So he asked if the other leaders of II Ephesus were to be tried with him. The answer was no. This confirmed his fears that this would be a kangaroo court and not a fair trial. Pope Dioscorus refused to appear, explaining that if this was the case, then he had nothing to say to the council. When the council received Pope Dioscorus's refusal to attend, Bishop Eusebius requested that Pope Dioscorus not be allowed to excuse himself from attending, and the council approved. Meanwhile, some visitors from Alexandria were given a chance to provide more allegations against Pope Dioscorus to the council. A priest named Athanasius, 2 deacons named Theodore and Iscarion, and a layman named Sophronius came to raise at least 6 additional accusations. They claimed that Pope Dioscorus had treated them poorly, that he opposed St. Cyril of Alexandria in theology and other matters, that he was a blasphemer, murderer, an arsonist, a demolisher of homes, and a destroyer of trees, who had always lived a shameful life of stealing boats and having affairs. They claimed that he challenged the authority of the emperor, and that he had excommunicated Pope Leo of Rome, and that he was despised by the whole flock in Alexandria. The council accepted these accusations without asking for any evidence of their veracity. Time, however, would prove these accusations to be baseless. If Pope Dioscorus was such a cartoon villain, why would the Church of Alexandria continue to support and venerate him after he was deposed at Chalcedon? Not only so, but this was the first time that it was ever mentioned that Pope Dioscorus had excommunicated Pope Leo. No evidence was given to prove that this had ever happened. These new accusations were all baseless claims meant to demonize Pope Dioscorus. After hearing these new accusations, the council summoned Pope Dioscorus one more time. Pope Dioscorus once more refused to appear, explaining he had nothing else to say. The bishops begged him to come in order to clear the church from any stain. He replied that the Holy Church can never be stained, and then affirmed his refusal to attend, saying, "What I said I have said, and I am satisfied with it." Now that Pope Dioscorus had refused to appear before the council for the third time, the council finally had a solid reason to condemn him. The bishops at the council imposed upon him a censure, meaning he no longer had the right to defend himself. The Roman delegates, led by Bishop Pescacinus, then passed the council's verdict on Pope Dioscorus. Pope Dioscorus was deposed on the following grounds. They claimed he had allowed into communion Eutychus after his condemnation at the Home Synod, but before his restoration at Second Ephesus. They also claimed that Pope Dioscorus had rebelled against the council, that he did not allow the tome of Pope Leo to be read at the Second Council of Ephesus, resulting in a great scandal in the church, that he had excommunicated Pope Leo, and finally, that he had refused 3 summons to the third session. This last one, the refusal of thrice summons, was the cherry on top. While none of the other claims were justifiable by evidence, no one could deny that Pope Dioscorus had shown contempt of court by refusing to appear when thrice summoned. Thus, it was on this basis that Pope Dioscorus was excommunicated and deposed by the Council of Chalcedon. The council then sent letters to Emperor Marcian of the East and Emperor Valentinian of the West, to Pope Dioscorus in prison, and to the Alexandrian clergy, and to the public in general, in the form of a notice, announcing the deposition of Pope Dioscorus. The letter does not mention any violation of heresy, but only references violations of the canons, most prominently refusing to appear when thrice summoned. The fact that Pope Dioscorus was deposed for contempt of court and not for heresy would be brought up again in a later session of the council. When composing the Chalcedonian Creed, the bishops would include in it the Alexandrian formula of 2 natures. One of the imperial commissioners then protested, saying that since the council had condemned Pope Dioscorus and exonerated Bishop Flavian, they should not use Pope Dioscorus's formula of 2 natures, but rather use Flavian and Leo's in 2 natures. Bishop Anatolius of Constantinople objected. He clarified that Pope Dioscorus was not condemned for his faith. His faith was very orthodox. He was condemned for refusing to appear when summoned 3 times. The council agreed with Bishop Anatolius. Even Bishop Eusebius of Dorylaeum agreed. However, they would eventually surrender to Pope Leo's pressure and replace the orthodox Alexandrian phrase of 2 natures with Pope Leo's in 2 natures.